Hey now, everybody. Welcome to Inglet.org. This is Professor Island, and today we are talking about the legend of La Llorona. Whether you're doing American Latino literature or horror literature, this particular story is applicable. And it's actually, while it's become more popular for various reasons in recent years, in the early 2010s, this story is actually quite old. Originally, the legend started around a character who ultimately was rooted in what essentially was a real person. Supposedly, the character itself was predicted by a goddess called Kiwacuatl. You'll have to pardon my pronunciation, a little rusty, who in the 1500s in Tenochtitlan apparently made herself into a beautiful woman. And she basically made this cry of "Oh, hijos míos," my children, and supposedly this was predicting the downfall of the native population from the invasion of the Spanish. In 1505, a girl who's called La Malinche was born of noble birth, but when she was 10, she was enslaved by the Mayans, and by 16, she was the mother of two boys by Hernan Cortez, who, of course, was the invader from Spain who brought Christianity and Spanish and all kinds of other fun things to the local folks there. And he was basically staying in the New World in order to establish, the colony and everything, ostensibly for Spain, but the Spanish king and queen who had financed all this wanted him to come back because they thought really what he was doing was creating his own country, his own empire that would rival theirs. And he didn't want to go back because he's got a life there, and he's now got this woman and these kids and everything. So what they did was they sent an attractive woman from Spain to seduce him, and she convinced him to take his kids with him and come back to Spain. Well, when La Malinche found out about this, she took off with her kids and ran away. And when the soldiers cornered her at the edge of a lake, she basically stabbed the two boys to death and dropped them in the water. She was arrested, and about 10 years later, she died. And interestingly, in the same year that she died, 1531, is the first time La Virgen de Guadalupe is first sighted. What happened after that is that people started seeing, originally in Mexico City, and then later on in other places across Latin America, they began seeing this woman dressed in white who would start usually in the town circle, in the town center, and during a full moon would appear and then walk over and eventually end up to a lake where she would be weeping by the side of the lake. Basically, this image became so pervasive that it became a cultural icon on several levels. The first one was, of course, is that the tragedy of a woman who is betrayed by her man results in the death of her children, and of course, in some ways, the loss, if you're a Christian, the loss of her soul, and if you're not, the fact that she will still remain as a ghost, as a mourning ghost for eternity. We also see this, however, reflected in other aspects in modern culture. And certainly if you look at the news, we see images or a replication of this La Llorona idea. In 1995, of course, Susan Smith in South Carolina, after claiming basically that, in her words, a black man had taken her kids and run away with her car, it was turned out that she had drowned her two children by strapping them into their car seats and then pushing the car into a lake. In 2001, Andrea Yates drowned her her 5 children in a bathtub in Houston. And in 2002, Bernadine Flores in Pilar, New Mexico, basically drowned her 2 kids. These replications of that actually keep this thing going. Now, when you come across this in literature, it may be one of two things. You might see the sad version of La Llorona, who's kind of a pitiful figure and designed to give us empathy. But you also may see her as a more horrific figure. And in fact, in many Latino cultures, this character is one that is used to frighten children into compliance. Basically, if you don't do this, La Llorona is going to steal you in the night and take you and drown you, kind of thing. And of course, the images of this can be both pathetic, empathetic, and horrific at the same time. And you will see this replicated in several stories, movies, things like that. Certainly one of the stories that we will cover in Latino literature, but also you might cover in other classes, including an English 101 or 103 class, is a work by Sandra Cisneros called Woman Hollering Creek, which is based on this idea. And again, whether you have this kind of sad, pathetic figure, or it is more horrific, the idea of the children being the victims of this, and then ultimately the woman herself being a victim of this, is pretty consistent throughout, and it really kind of comes back to woman's betrayal by man. So anyway, that's La Llorona. Check it out. There's a lot of material out there to be found on it. It's a very interesting story, and you'll see that it's quite pervasive, not only in Latin America, but also now in many places throughout the world. All right? Stay in touch.